I was really bored this weekend, so I decided to go to the local lake. I also brought some corn with me, that way I can target carp. I found a dead 3-foot carp swimming on its belly here, and I've also caught a few catfish out of here as well. So to the left of me, there's actually dog kennels, that's why you can hear dogs barking. There's also a creek behind the lake that runs all the way to downtown Colorado Springs, but the only thing I've seen in there were trout fingerlings. From what I've seen, the water here is fairly polluted. I was fishing off of one of the shores one time, and I stepped on a rock only to realize that it was an old couch cushion covered in mud. Carp are a group of fish species found all over the world, and they're incredibly adaptable. They can survive in water that most fish wouldn't dare swim in. Dirty rivers, stagnant ponds, you name it. Carp are like the survivors of the fish world. They're also tough as nails, which might explain why they've been introduced and often thrive in so many different environments. Here's where things get interesting. Depending on who you ask, carp are either culinary gold or an invasive menace. In some cultures, particularly in Asia and parts of Europe, carp is a delicacy. Fried, baked, or made into soups, this fish has been a staple for centuries. People even farm them, not just for food but also for ornamental purposes. Ever heard of koi fish? Those brightly colored, beautiful fish you see in fancy garden ponds are just a glamorous version of the humble carp. But then there's the other side of the story. In places like the US, carp are often viewed as pests. Some species, like the infamous Asian carp, have taken over rivers and lakes, outcompeting native fish and throwing ecosystems out of whack. They've become such a problem that there are literal fishing tournaments aimed at removing as many as possible. Some people call them trash fish, which seems harsh, but the nickname sticks. Whenever I tie on a catfishing rig, I always tie the hook to the swivel with braided line, and then from the swivel to the weight, I use fluorocarbon. That way, whenever the weight actually gets caught on something on the bottom, I can just snap it off and still reel in the hook. Carp are extremely smart fish. They've got this uncanny ability to learn from their surroundings. Fishermen will tell you that once a carp gets caught and released, it often becomes harder to catch the second time. That's some survival instincts right there. Carp are also extremely entertaining to watch. Go to any pond with a population of these fish, toss in some bread, and watch them swarm like tiny scale vacuums. It's weirdly mesmerizing, like an aquatic mosh pit. And if you're into fishing, reeling in a big carp is no joke. They put up a fight, making them a favorite for anglers looking for a challenge. So right now I'm intentionally using an oversized triple-aught hook to avoid gut hooking any fish. There are quite a few different catfishing rigs. The Carolina rig is a staple of any catfisherman's arsenal. The Carolina rig is simple, effective, and versatile. It's essentially a sliding sinker rig. A sinker slides on your main line, followed by a bead to protect your knot, then tied to a swivel. From the swivel, a leader line and hook complete the setup. The Carolina rig is a great fishing rig for fishing on the bottom, where catfish spend most of their time sniffing around for food. It works in still lakes or rivers with current. The sliding sinker lets your bait move naturally, and when a catfish bites, it doesn't feel the weight right away, giving you that extra second to set the hook. Another effective catfishing rig is the Santee Cooper rig. Think of the Santee Cooper rig as the Carolina rig's fancier cousin. It's built the same way but adds a peg float above the hook on the leader line. The Santee Cooper rig shines in lakes and reservoirs where flatheads and blues patrol for meals. It's also a favorite for drifting or dragging baits behind a boat. The float gives your bait a little action, enticing those lazy big boys to take a bite. Another effective rig that I'm not using right now is the 3-way rig. It's all about control. It's perfect for fishing in strong currents, especially in big rivers. Here's the setup. Tie a 3-way swivel to your main line, then attach a short leader with a sinker to one loop and a longer leader with your hook to the other. This rig keeps your bait stationary while allowing it to flutter naturally in the current, a deadly combination for hungry catfish. It's particularly effective for channel cats and blues, holding in deeper holes or around structures. The rig that I have set up right now is extremely similar to a Kentucky rig. It's a vertical fishing rig where the sinker is at the very bottom of the line with one or more hooks tied above it using dropper loops. This setup is perfect for presenting bait at specific depths. Finally got a bite, and it's something big. It's fighting pretty hard. This lake is right next to my house, and I've always managed to catch something out here pretty much 8 out of 10 times.
Catfish. Yep.
So I'm not going to keep this guy because he's pretty small, and also this lake has a water treatment plant right next to it and trash floating around in the water, but he is pretty cool. So what makes catfish so unique? For starters, they're bottom feeders with built-in food detectors. Those long whiskers or barbells aren't just for show, they're basically sensory tools that help them sniff out their next meal. Whether it's a piece of hot dog, a ball of stink bait, or a chunk of fresh shad, catfish aren't picky eaters. If it smells strong, they're in. Catfish are also tough as nails. They thrive in muddy rivers, quiet lakes, and even brackish waters. Blues and flatheads can grow to enormous sizes, sometimes well over 100 pounds. Catching one of these beasts is like going toe-to-toe with an underwater tank. Then there's the channel cat, the most common variety, which is smaller, but just as fun to reel in. So this guy was just interested in the rig that I'm using. I'm pretty much using a modified version of a Kentucky rig that is not adjustable. The adjustable version of a Kentucky rig would probably be a lot better to use. I've tried tying knots to sections of braided line with other braided line, and the braid will just cut through itself. So if you're going to do something like this, you want to use a heavier gauge fluorocarbon and then a lighter gauge fluorocarbon tied to itself. Fishing for catfish usually takes several hours, but today I was able to catch one in under 15 minutes. You can also fly fish for carp, which is something that I'd like to do later this summer, but you have to wait for the right time to do it when all of the carp are hitting the top of the water near the shores, which it can be really hard to figure out when that happens.